ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you here at the ESMT, also on behalf of the ESMT and of the Innovate Europe Foundation. It's a great pleasure. My name is Johannes Lindner. I'm the co-director of the Jacques Delors Centre at the Hertie School. The idea of this event came in autumn when, in a debate with Enrico Letta, Enrico said on the question of how to make sure that the report will be followed up, what is important to really rally the support of the innovators, the entrepreneurs, the startups, those that really want to scale up in the single market, that want to get the finance and the access to finance through a saving and investment union. Those are the people that we need to rally beyond the national politicians. Fortunately, Anna Herrhausen had introduced me to Clark and Innovate Europe Foundation, and I said immediately, okay, let's team up. We do an event, and then the ESMT was sort of the natural partner as a hub for the debates on technology and finance. And we decided to do this before the national elections, because we thought it's very important that in these national elections, the politicians that stand for election, that they know that they have two hats on. There will be national politicians, but there will also be European decision makers. And to underline the urgency of the topic that we are discussing today, also for the new role of the new government, because of the urgency, but also, of course, because of the political weight that Berlin and the new government will carry in that debate. One point, just very briefly to illustrate this, and this is a data point that doesn't come from Enrico's report, but from Pascal Lamy, so somebody that sort of remains within the Jacques Delors family, so to say. And that is a data point that I think is very telling, because it shows the gap that we have vis-a-vis the US and China when it comes to go from science to market. So if you look at the science publication, we are almost sort of on par with China and the US. Then you go to the level of patent, and you already see sort of we're behind China, we're behind the US, but still sort of in the same ball game, so to say. And then you look at unicorns, and it's really a massive gap. So in the magnitude of a quarter of the Chinese unicorn, an eighth of the American unicorn number. And of course, this is an issue of finance, of access to finance, of scaling up, of starting business. It's also a question of profitability, and of course, the costs of restructuring, the cost of failure. So it's costly in Europe to fail, and that's why taking entrepreneurial risk is done less. But it's also, to some extent, you have the feeling, and that's a point that Enrico has been making very strongly in the report. It's also, you have the feeling that national politicians also don't take the political risk that it takes to actually strengthen Europe and to integrate the single market. And what the report has really shown, that strategy of not doing this also has huge costs. So the costs of non-Europe, in fact, are high, and they're ever increasing in a world where unfettered global competition and global power is more relevant, and in a way where global power competition also meets market power competition, or the sort of political power and the market power are much more intertwined. And for that, I think I'm very grateful that we have a great panel together, and I'm also very grateful that Enrico has agreed to come and as well to discuss with our other fellow panelists that Clark will introduce. But to kick off the debate, I'm very grateful that Enrico will start with a keynote. And I decided that Enrico doesn't really need much more of an introduction, except for one thing that sometimes gets forgotten. He's also president of our sister institute, the Jacques Delors Institute in Paris. And I'm very proud for all the work that we've been doing together in that capacity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Johannes. Thank you all. Thank you to the other organizers. I'm really very pleased to have the opportunity to be here, first of all, to listen. But I am also very pleased to say a few words at the beginning. First of all, trying to say why I see a link between the single market and the topic that we had today, because in reality it's not an immediate link. The single market has usually was a big discussion in the last 35 years in Europe that became a little bit boring discussion. When in the European discussions, when in the university activities, we started thinking about the single market, the idea was, okay, it's business as usual, and it's nothing very exciting. But in reality, when the European Council asked me to prepare a report on the state of the art and on the possibility to relaunch the single market, of course, in the name of Jacques Delors, the founder of the single market, I decided to try to take the single market out from the political corner in which the single market was. And the only way to do so is to link the single market with higher purpose of the entire European Union. Is the only way, I think, to be able to convince people that the single market is worthy, it is possible to invest political energy, resources, and not just leave the single market in the hands of the experts. That was the, I would say, the destiny in the last decade, in the last years. I always think that in the last speech at the State of the Union speeches of von der Leyen, the single market wasn't even mentioned. So the single market was not the center of the debate. Today, if you take the competitiveness compass presented just Wednesday, the single market is the center of the project of von der Leyen for the future, with this idea of the links with higher purpose. So on that, I think we had some important achievements and some important steps. And it is crucial that we are having this discussion this week, because it's not a week that is, I would say, an usual week. We had the feeling of what just Johannes said is not for, I would say, political debates or for academic seminars, is the truth. The race today is between China and the US. And I think what happened in the stock exchanges in this week gave us, I think, the best reason to say this seminar is important. And I think maybe you organized it to have that. But it is really crucial for this very reason. We had the feeling that we are third today. And we are third today for many reasons. And I tried to give some solutions in the report, solutions that are also the outcome of, how we say, debate, listening phase. I name it as an inclusive exercise and a collective exercise, because I met many startuppers, many people from the innovation side, from Helsinki to Lisbon, from the Baltic countries to my country. And at the end of the day, I think today we have the possibility to open not only a discussion, but to have and to live in a momentum. Because what von der Leyen said Wednesday, and the sense of awareness of the problem that we have in Europe, we are lagging behind, we are third, we need to recuperate, and maybe we are starting understanding that we can recuperate only from inside, not from outside. There won't be any, I would say, help from outside trying to eliminate this asymmetric and very complicated situation. We can find from inside. Why from inside? On three levels. That is my contribution to today's debate. Above, aside, below. First of all, above. What is the main problem? There are a ranking of priorities and problems we are having. But if I have to say one of them, we need something mobilizing energies in horizontal way on tech leadership and innovation in Europe. Until now, we didn't have this engine. And this is why in the report, I decided to, I would say, raise a flagship, a flag. The flag is the fifth freedom. And I think that this flagship can be an engine helping also the debate. Why I say that? Because until now, when we discuss about tech leadership, innovation, and so on, we are entering in a general debate, but we are not able to find the way to mobilize energies. And when I say energies, I say political energies first, financial energies, academic energies, and industrial. And until now, we didn't have this momentum. I think the lack of a fifth freedom is one of them. You know that the single market is based on 4 freedoms, and the awareness of the fact that the single market, that is the most important part of the European integration, based on the Article 26 of the European Treaty, is based on 4 freedoms: goods, services, capitals, and people. And the 4 are very much, I would say, 20th century economy based. The concept that is behind these 4 freedoms is a concept really analogic, if I may say. It's a very, we say, what we touch is a very tangible economy that is behind these 4 freedoms. So the idea to say we have to change it and we have to make people aware that we need a flagship, we need an engine, and to say that maybe this 5th freedom, so innovation, research, skills, knowledge, can be the one because it is transversal and horizontal enough to try to mobilize all these energies. And at the same time, if I may say, it works in terms of branding. And we know very well that brands, names in today's life are very important. I know that in the academic milieu, usually we say, but we want substance. We don't want branding. It's not a communication. And I agree. But if we don't have a great branding, even substance will be very complicated. Even mobilizing financial resources will be very complicated. So I strongly believe that this flagship on the 5th freedom can be the one. I urge the Commission to raise this flag and to say the next 5 years, they have to be the 5 years of the 5th freedom. I am happy because I saw that the President of the Commission gave this mission to the Commissioner on Innovation, Research and Startup. You can easily find it in the roadmap that von der Leyen gave to Zaev, and I think it's something that can be a first step. But of course, it's not enough. This is why places like, and debates like the one we are having today, at the very core of a crucial electoral campaign, the most important electoral campaign in Europe, can be interesting, because if Germany takes this flag and decide to have this flag at the center of German contribution to the European Union, I think that can be a fantastic outcome of everything. I know this is not the case until now, because the electoral campaign, I know, is on other issues. But I hope that this flag can become the one. And it is important to have this flag because it is the way to be comprehensive on all the aspects, on what today is needed and what is the reason why today we are lagging behind and we are third. I said also aside. What does it mean aside? It means that there are many conditions where today, through the single market, we need to have a big contribution to this 5th freedom. And some of these conditions are linked to one of the big topics that von der Leyen put at the center of what she said Wednesday. That is, in general, the topic of simplification and bureaucracy and the rest. The fact that Europe is becoming too famous for the bureaucratic and over-regulating system is something that is becoming a legend, a negative legend, but it's something that is in part true, not only because of the European Union, but because of the complexity of the system we have, because the system has a European level, but has also the 27 level and the Länder level and the local level, is what the French name in a fantastic way, le millefeuille. That is a cake, but that is in that case more than a cake and is less, I would say, not so sweet. But is in reality is the true problem we have, because we have a multiplication and this difference among all the different countries on the law system, the regions, the Länder, is becoming today one of the main problems we have. This is why one of the proposals I put two proposals on that in the report. One is to stop with directives and to move to regulations everywhere. I know it is complicated, I know it is divisive, but I know it is necessary, because if we continue with directives, you know that the directive needs a national implementation law. And we know very well, and I say that because I come from an experience in my own country. I was minister in my country on these topics, and I knew what was the approach. And the approach was to say, okay, we play the first half of the match, but the most important part is the second half. And the second half is a national one. And we know how to do it. And the consequence of that is the lack of level playing field in Europe, is the triumph of ring fencing, gold plating, and that is, of course, for any startup, for any SME, for any innovator, is exactly the opposite of what you need, because you need the level playing field to be successful. You start in one country, you can grow up suddenly, but you need to have the level playing field, otherwise it doesn't work. And the second one on that is the so-called 28th virtual state. That is the other idea I put in the report. What does it mean? It means that it will be politically impossible to win a battle on how to have uniform regulations everywhere on, for instance, the business law everywhere. Each country has its own, for historic reasons, and each country will defend the historic reasons why in the 18th century they wanted to have this kind of code des affaires and so on. The key point is not to spend energies to cancel, to try to cancel. It will be a failure. The point is to create a 28th virtual state with its own regulation system that becomes optional for startuppers or SMEs. They can choose this one, and choosing this one, it becomes a passepartout everywhere, with a system in which this 28th virtual state business law can be, of course, applied everywhere. This passepartout can be a sort of fast track, helping startuppers, SMEs. I think it is a very strong tool. And then I mentioned, and I stop below. Why below? Because we need money too. And this is the other big part. This is really the dark side of the moon, because it is clear that today the lack of enough money and the lack of dimension is the most important problem that we are having here. And the lack of dimension of funding is because of fragmentation. At the end of the day, it is because of fragmentation. It's not because of bad will. We have goodwill on that. But the fragmentation today is creating, is eliminating all the conditions to be at the level of the others. And I wanted, with the report, to repeat, and this is my final point, that in reality, there's a big contradiction in Europe. And the big contradiction is the fact that is a sort of the syndrome of the euro. Because we have the euro in our pockets, in our wallets, there's a general knowledge saying that we are a unified economic system because we have the same currency. And so in all the, I say, media discussions, political discussions, university seminars, you have always the same slide with the three: China, US, Europe. China, US, Europe. But in reality, China and the US, they are one. We are 27. And we are 27 in so many fields. And at the end of the day, this is the main problem. I give you just 2 examples and I stop, because the lack of unity on the 3 topics that I put at the center of the report, so telecom, energy, and financial services, is something that, as Johannes just said, is a cost for all of us, is the reason why our fragmentation is making happy Wall Street, the US industry, and the Chinese. I give you just 2 examples. The first example is the fact that we are all used to pay with digital systems, and we, the Italians, will never pay with a French credit card. The French will never accept to pay with a credit card written in German. The Germans will never pay with a Spanish credit card, and all happy to pay only with American credit cards. Every day of our life, with a transfer of data and money to the US, even if the transactions are among European consumers, European producers, on the European ground, for European goods. But fees and data are flying to the US. And the second example is about telecom. That is the other absolutely incredible example. And I want to provoke a smile. I just started a new job in my life, and I'm starting this job in Madrid. So I rented a flat, and I tried to change the contract of light in this, of the electricity in this flat. So I started phone discussion with the provider, with my Spanish that is not so good. And then we arrived at the end, ready to sign the contract, and the one on the other side of the phone told me, okay, we are at the end. Give me your bank account number and give me your mobile telephone number. And I gave him my bank account that starts with IT, Italy, and I gave him my mobile that starts with a +39. I have also a second one with a +33, and the contract stopped immediately because the man told me, but you have to give me an ES bank account and a +34 telephone number. Otherwise, I can't give you electricity. I didn't have the temptation to tell him, I send you my report on the single market. I, of course, bought a telephone number with +34, and I opened a bank account. But just to give you the sense of the fact that we are not one, we are 27. Even in this very, very small aspect of our life, can you imagine on innovation, financial market? This is why, and I stop here, the proposal of the Savings and Investments Union, that is the creation of one market of savings with the bridge to investments, and to bring these investments to innovation and technology, with the idea to create a deep tech stock exchange, one, not 27 as it is today, and with the idea to try to push dimension, because without dimension it will be impossible to be at the level of this competition. These are some of the ideas. I'm really very, very happy to be here and to listen the conversation, to listen the reactions, because I'm sure that the contribution on this topic is just at the beginning, and we need to use all these tools, and we need to relaunch on this direction. Otherwise, the discussion in the next years would be only not if we can recuperate, we can overcome the Chinese or the Americans. The discussion will only be in each European countries to decide whether we want to be a Chinese colony or an American colony. And frankly speaking, I want to be European. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hello, hello. Testing one. Oh, wait. Hello, hello. Am I there yet? Thanks so much, Enrico Letta. Ironic that an American, yes, also agrees to not be an American colony here. I'm Clark Parsons. I've been running the IE.F now for 9 years, but I've been a Berliner for 27, so it's a thrill to be here and see Anna and some of the great IE.F supporters in the room. I look around and see Gunnar. Wonderful to be here. It's really a testament to you, Enrico Letta, that you said, I don't want to necessarily talk to the German politicians on stage right before the election. I want to talk to the innovators, and I want to talk to the people who really know the economy from the inside. So we're delighted that you were willing to sit down and have a dialogue. I'd love to moderate a discussion with us and leave a little time for you guys also to ask some questions. It's crazy if you all have microphones that we don't use it. So we'll be getting to you before we're done to let everyone ask some questions. But what I wanted to first just kick things off with was to let everybody, so many of us have read the report and have reflected, just let each one of you kind of go down the row and reflect on the comments you heard, but also you've also had a lot of time to digest the report and its meaning. And I wanted to kick it off with René Obermann, who's been a friend of the IE.F from day one, before it was born. And what a better person to respond, because for those who don't know his biography, his titles now only sort of tell you half the story. René is the chairman of a private equity firm for Europe, Warburg Pincus. He's the chairman of Europe, but he's also the chair of the board of Airbus, so our industrial champion that everyone likes to talk about. He's also on the board of the IE.F. And for those who are old like me, we remember him also as a Telekom-Unternehmer, a founder who also ran Deutsche Telekom. So you have an incredible perspective on the highs and the lows of the small and the big, little tech and big tech of Europe. So René, it'd be great to hear your thoughts reflecting on what you just heard from Enrico.
Thank you. This is working? Okay. So first of all, thank you very much. Great to be here. This is the future leadership of Europe. So I think we're in the right audience. And I think we should start with the question of, is the solution to our standstill at the moment a 27 unity of member states? And can we create scale and the ability for young companies to build their business much faster and without all the bureaucratic hurdles? And in this regard, I couldn't agree more with many of the points you made. I'm not sure about the money aspect. I think this is not so much the problem, but that's a separate discussion. We should discuss that separately in the course of today, whether Schuldenbremse, for instance, a Keynesian model, more aggressive, flooding the market with easy money and so on is the right recipe or not. I have probably a differentiated viewpoint here. But in regards to the scale effects, I totally agree. Europe has become a bureaucratic monster. If you ever have worked abroad and you spend weekends at home and then you commute, you would know what it means to do your tax declaration, that you actually have to exactly find the right moment when you cross the border in order to be explicit and clear and accurate. But that's only one example. I could give you plenty of those examples. So I think Europe is part of the answer, but it's a longer term answer to the situation. I think we also need to look at the other longer term and the short term answers. I don't want to monologue here. We'll come to that in more detail, but there's a cultural restitution of, I think, entrepreneurial energy and what we celebrate, what we want as a society. I think we're wrong in just pointing out to politicians being the culprits. I think we all in this room and all of society are part of the culprits because we have become very complacent over the last decades. And it's not a matter of the last Ampelregierung, it's a matter of decades. And our culture has become far too complacent. Everything was too easy. So now we are in a big dilemma. And now I think we need to completely reinvent ourselves. And of course, yes, there are short-term levers. Let's discuss them in the course of the meeting.
Super. Thanks so much, René. You mentioned entrepreneurship, so it's a perfect Stahlvorlage here to give the mic to Dr. Annika von Mutius, who has founded a company, Empion, which is an HR tech startup in the AI space, but also you have another role, which is you're on the German AI, how do I say it in German, the Bundesverband, Deutsche KI, so the German AI Association. So you have two hats as well, a founder, but also somebody who sees the whole ecosystem. How do you respond to what you heard from Enrico Letta? What especially speaks to you there from his message?
I think, of course, it's super valuable, all of your points that you mentioned. But for me, just personally, I always feel also very much appreciating how much the culture and the diversity in Europe also gives us so many opportunities. So I do not necessarily agree with all of those points, but I fully agree with the fact that I think we can be pretty much proud of what we have also in terms of diversity and the many countries that come together, because I lived in San Francisco before for 4 years and I came back 3 years ago to Berlin, and I'm pretty happy to live in Europe. I wouldn't decide differently, to be completely honest. But I very much loved your point in terms of the brand, because what you just mentioned, I founded a company here. We are growing. We are also hiring from abroad. I think that should also be a topic we should be discussing. And for me, it's so sometimes, I'm sorry to say the word, but sometimes so embarrassing to see how long it takes to hire people from abroad. Yeah, we are currently hiring a CTO from the US, and the exciting, I don't think exciting is the right word, but in terms of branding, I'm pretty sure this potential CTO and all of his friends don't think that Europe is the brand to be working in, because he's waiting for his visa for 6 months now. And I'm just thinking that there are so many dimensions to think about this topic, but also to be proud of what we are, also in terms of diversity and the different cultures that we actually have.
Super. Thanks for that point of view. And now, to get a little broader, we're really delighted to have, I guess, one of our hosts, Hausherr Lars-Hendrik Röller, PhD. You're also obviously a professor here in economics at ESMT, but you wear a lot of other hats. The Berlin Global Dialogue, now several years old, really wonderful program of international exchange has now been established here, and you're also the chair of the Green Guarantee Group. What's going through your mind when you're hearing Enrico Letta describe his report, which we've now had a half a year to also reflect upon and see how that's translating into action? And you've been in government too, so how are you reflecting on the words you heard?
Yeah, thanks. I think those points, particularly single market, I think was an important point which you really put back onto the agenda. That's very pertinent, because if you think about China and the US and you look at Donald Trump and what he's doing, he's essentially leveraging his market power at home and in a not so friendly way towards his friends. So I think sort of re-emerging, completing the single market, and you have different areas of the single market. I think the financial market, the savings and investment union is a very important part of that. I think that's extremely important that you hammer that point home with your analysis. And I think the fifth freedom right is also a very important contribution. But I just went to Davos. So my main point is, you look at Donald Trump, who I had to deal with 4 years and win the chancellery. I think your prime ministry was just before. You were lucky, I guess. But I think we handled it reasonably well at that time, but Europe was relatively strong. In Europe, if you look at the data, it's actually in a relative decline, as your report is saying. It's really dramatic, as René was saying. I think we need to do something. I just went to Davos, and then there's Donald Trump, and he had, I think, that day 100 executive orders. Some of them are, this is public here, right? So to be careful. I mean, I don't care anymore, by the way, but you can question the wisdom of all of that, and they're being challenged. But the talk of town in Davos, which is not normal people, I might add, by far not normal people. It's all about action, action, action. And in Europe, there's no action at all. And you're falling behind. And so I think you need political leadership in Europe to implement some of that. We need action. And if you look at the competitiveness compass, which I think you alluded to, which was published, I think 2 days ago or something, it's a work program. It's what we do in Brussels normally, the Commission. And I'm not blaming them. I think they're trying, and I think the pressure is enormous at this point to do something. It's a work program for 4 years of all kinds of things. So my wish is that the political leadership is there to prioritize a little bit and to do things quickly, because we don't have 4 or 5 years to do something. For example, the Savings and Investment Union, which is a big thing because a lot of capital is going to the United States. It's part of the innovation gap, which we have in Europe, as you said correctly. They actually want to do it in Q1 of this year, which is great. I think we need to do things quickly. So my hope is, and I can go into more details, but I won't do this. I think there are some priorities I would put forward. I think Savings and Investment Union is a huge one, and we've been negotiating it while you were Prime Minister, actually, for 10, 15, 20 years, and nothing has happened, really, because of national interests, and some of them are German and Italian and French. So you need political leadership, and who are the leaders in Europe? And then that's number one. Number two, you need a bad situation. And I think the second element is that I think Europeans realize we need to do something. I think this is also about the German election right now. I think if we don't get this right in the next 4 years, we're going to have a different Germany potentially in 29. This is the argument. It's debatable, but I think that we need. But it's not going well in Europe, and I think we need to. And if the people are willing to move and you have political leadership, I think we should be able to get that done. It's not a problem, sorry, of analyzing the problem anymore. I think these kinds of analysis, we don't have enough venture capital, we're falling behind on patents. That's already there when I was in the Chancery. It's a problem of having political support, political leadership, and action in moving forward. I think this is my hope will happen.
And if I may add, Hendrik, I think it's also a matter of stronger and much better collaboration across the business sector and politicians. I think there's an amazing level of, and a shocking level of belief in the state in wider and wider parts of society, which I find, it has been proven wrong in history all over and over again. But there is a lack of business professionalism and understanding in politics, which is also flabbergasting. And in many discussions I've had and I still have with senior politicians, I find it sometimes shocking. And on the other side, having said that, there's also a very big lack of political understanding in business. Many of us business leaders do not dare to go out and really confront the political realities and include those thoughts in their decision making. And it's very often that particular interests are being lobbied for without thinking the broader picture. So I think it is mutual. I think we have a mutual responsibility. And so far, policy making has been driven by NGOs in Brussels, I'm sorry, and not by business. Business has not been at eye level. I think this has to stop.
Just want to say that this gentleman over here is actually an example, one of the few ones in Germany, sorry to put you on the spot here, who understands that actually businesses understand the political process and not blame politicians for not doing something, and also integrating the political process into your company. I think that's exactly right. But that's also what makes me very worried, because when you look at the response to what's happening on the other side of the Atlantic by the business community,
action, action, action.
SDG, sustainability, all that talk. It's now, now everybody is going where, the political power is. And it's only temporary. And whether it works, it's another question, by the way, without criticizing your country. But I think, as René says, the political responsibility by business leaders is very important. And I hope in Europe we have a lot of that.
Let's drill down to the action layer, if you will. I would love to also go back to Enrico Letta, because it's been a while since your report is out. We now have a new commission. We've had an election. We have a president who's appointed a cabinet. She did some pretty interesting moves, like putting startups together with innovation funding and splitting that from education, interestingly. So we now have a commissioner for startups, scale-ups, and innovation, doing the Horizon Europe research, tying that together. So I know the wheels turn very slowly in Brussels and in all these capitals. Are you at least emboldened to see, at least in sort of Brussels tempo, action happening, or do you feel there's still not enough urgency? Because I was just in Brussels yesterday. Anybody who's been there lately can feel there's a new wind. Suddenly everybody's asking me what a startup is, and want to know. And it's people as old as me who've been working in Brussels 20 years are like, tell me about these startups. So clearly, do you feel it in the wake of your report that, like, are you seeing the right moves in terms of actions being put in place by the new commission? Of course, we have the press here. I'm going to put you on the spot, but I mean, are you happy, or do you feel like they're not jumping nearly high enough and fast enough?
I think Röller puts one very important point, is the difference in terms of perception, image of, how we say, Terminator on the other side of the Atlantic, saying that I write, I sign, we go and we act and we do, images, migrants deported, and so on. In 2 days, wow. And on this side of the Atlantic, 50 people around the room discussing, and who knows who will be the one taking the final decision, and so on, which rules. We have to be aware that, and on this point, you're totally right, there's also a problem of general awareness that is absolutely crucial, and it is not like that, because the US-driven communication is today what is winning in Europe too. So the model Terminator is very strong here too. But at the end of the day, Europe is the consequence of 27 countries. What Annika said before, our diversity. We are proud of our diversity. And I didn't want to propose with my report to become Americans. Absolutely not. I don't want to propose any gigantism or things like that. I like Europe because Europe is a fantastic mix between big and small. What I want to say is that because of the change in the world, the single market, I use always this example, was created in a world in which my country, Italy, was as big as China and India combined when the single market was created. I know it provokes laughs, but it is like that. So the key point is to understand that the world has completely changed, and the mix between small and big has to change in a very simple way. The small of yesterday can be the same small of tomorrow, is the big of yesterday. If the big of yesterday is the same big of today and tomorrow, I think your example or your experience in the telecom is there explaining that we had and we have 27 telecom markets because we thought 30 years ago that our countries were big enough and the incumbent was big enough in the national dimension to be global. But 30 years ago, it was yes. Today is no, clearly. But the political environment is refraining the incumbent to merge among them. It is not a technical problem, it's a political problem. Governments, they don't want to have mergers among incumbents because they think they will lose control. And the national control is today the ceiling for, in my view, the growth and the capacity. And my final point is that Europe is, I would say, inclusive way to decide. But I want to give you share with you one message. I'm having a second tour d'Europe after the first one. I had to prepare the report and to listen. Second tour d'Europe presenting the report. And what surprised me the most is the fact that the first question I receive is the following one. Very good what we are saying, interesting, but it will be impossible to implement it because someone will put a veto. And it is interesting because it's not true, as you know. All the single market issue, all the single market field is a majority rule driven. There's no veto, there's no unanimity in the single market. Everything is at majority. But people think that the veto and the unanimity is there. Why? Because the behaviors of the political leaders in Brussels are behaviors as veto behaviors. That means that we don't take decisions in majority because each country, I would say, doesn't want to put one in minority because he feels that yourself can be in minority on another issue. So we prefer to have always a consensus, but consensus is a crazy way to govern. So the key point is a political behavior that we have to change. So what I said to the political leaders when they asked me to present the report to them, I said, please apply the rules we have. Don't discussing about changing rules. We have rules. Please vote on that. You want to create the Savings and Investments Union. Do it. Vote. 2 countries will be against. Who matters?
René, you had a thought? Yeah. Oh. I mean, I'd love to get René and Annika also, let's get a little more deep into this notion of the innovation layer because you're both working there. René, we always talk about European tech sovereignty. You also, were an investor and involved in Ionos, a cloud champion from Germany. There are sort of Lichtblicke in Europe that we have sovereign tech that we could build upon. Give me your point of view on where are we, because so many people in Brussels say we need the Airbus of this and the Airbus of that whenever you talk about tech, and you're sitting there at Airbus, so you know what's working and not. But we tried the Airbus of cloud and Gaia X. If anyone knows it, Google it, didn't work. So, how can we translate this into action if everyone now is running around saying, okay, let's innovate. Well, what do we do? Oh, let's build our Euro tech stack, which was going to be a topic Francesca was bringing to this panel. And we know, okay, how can we do this in a federated or a private way? We can't do state top-down tech stack of Europe, or can we? What's your point of view on that?
No, we can't. I mean, we can try, but it's unlikely to succeed. I think Enrico made an important point in regards to allowing and looking at the competition policy of Europe and not being, so obsessed by keeping in each member state a super high level of competition in capital-intense infrastructures, for instance, because these require scale. So we should allow for cross-border, cross-European consolidation where it makes sense and where it matters, particularly where massive capital is involved, and look at the global market because we're facing the global market in our competition. And this particularly applies, for instance, to defense platforms or to space. Yeah, when there may be a consolidation need, or there is a consolidation need, for instance, in order to compete with very strong US players and not to become completely dependent on a monopoly communication internet access infrastructure called Starlink. I mean, I don't know when Europe woke up to this, but I've been trying to evangelize this 5 years ago that we need to do something, and eventually Europe came up with a concept. I don't think it's perfect, but at least it's an attempt, and now we need to make it happen. So it's about allowing and looking at the competition slightly differently than before, and not being completely obsessed with having a super high level of competitive intensity market by market, but creating within Europe by cross-border consolidation, allowing big players to emerge and compete with the giants in the United States or in Asia. Number one, and I don't think it makes sense to run behind technologies which are already, let's say, dominated by US or soon Chinese players, but go for the next level of technologies and the next generation of technologies and focus our efforts more on the high-tech sector, i.e. on quantum, i.e. on space technologies. Maybe we're still good in biotech, I don't know, but we need to translate those research excellence into entrepreneurialism, into entrepreneurial initiatives. And that's something we need to focus on now.
Super. Let's deep dive further into AI with Annika, because you've got an AI startup here. The talk of the week is, of course, DeepSeek and what the Chinese have done, because it clearly upended a lot of assumptions we had about the AI race and where the value would be captured. As of a week now, the large language model layer looks like it might be a commodity. And so now everyone is saying, okay, the value is really going to be at the application layer. chance for Europe? Just curious to know, do you feel like you've been written off? You're trying to persuade a CTO to come to third place Europe. What are our chances in the AI market still, from your point of view? And are we doing anything or enough to bolster that, our homegrown AI market?
Yeah, I think so. First of all, because you were just mentioning DeepSeek, I mean, it's not so surprising. I know media covered that very surprising, but the truth is that's not the case. I mean, that's how innovation works. Then over time, things can go faster and less expensive, and it's pretty much good. And I think we should generally, when we talked, Enrico, you talked a lot about also investments, and I think that's important because we need to invest more here in Europe compared to what the US and also Asia does. But still, what we also realize in a very microeconomic perspective, but also macroeconomically, not always more money helps. And I think the DeepSeek example is pretty great, exemplifying that you can also, with very much limited resources, provide outstanding results. That's apparently also something I know from my entrepreneurial journey. I remember the last venture round we closed was pretty large for our stadium, and after that we just moved to a new office, and that's just what's happening, and that's also what's happening with money going into deep technology. So if to answer your question, of course, we have a chance in Europe also with respect to artificial intelligence, but that's maybe not the very same case as what Anthropic or OpenAI does. I think we need to focus a little bit more on our core strengths. And I think this is something that also comes very close to what Enrico says, because we have a diversity of different countries. And within the countries, let's take Germany as an example, we have a huge number of wonderful SMEs that have the best expertise knowledge we can think of. And I think that's, from my perspective, the greatest chance that we have, because we always think in large language models. Why don't we think in small data models? That's a huge opportunity. Make actually small data models performative with expertise input that can actually create performative output with a tiny proportion of processing power, by the way, which makes this then again economically way more efficient. So when you ask me, have we lost the game or not? Of course not. But I think we have to go our own European way, and I think that could be a very especially great way compared to abroad anywhere.
Super, really helpful. Let's take it a little bigger. I'll give you the mic, or no, Annika can give it. I wanted to ask you about, we're talking here about facets of what you might call industrial policy. And we're having an election in a couple of weeks where Germany and Europe is really trying to figure out, is our business model dead? Do we need a new one? What's the new one? You've been so involved for so much of your career in thinking about how to make, what should an industrial policy be, and how to actually implement it with an economy that's private and not, top down for the Chinese investing or the US letting it rip with Wall Street. But, both have a different model. We have a European model. How are you seeing the interplay between a German industrial policy model and what Europe is grappling with right now?
Okay, I can relate to what Annika just says. So it's very interesting what you're saying. In AI, DeepSeek, something happened. The game is not over, and I think we need to think about what is the right strategy for Europe there. And I think we don't know really. So I think the industrial policy should allow, whether it's small data models or big data models, and what the right regulatory environment. We just have the AI Act, which I think coming online in 2 days, I think officially. So my view is that this is great and this is very innovative, and we need to lay the ground for a European, maybe it's responsible AI. This is what everybody seems to be talking about, and this is what the AI Act follows. I think that we should do. And I think large government strategic plans, and we have that in all these kinds of technological areas, I'm usually very hesitant about. I think we should rather have the groundwork and the ecosystem and the financing in place, incentives for talent to be in Germany and Europe, and then let it evolve, because nobody knows what's going to happen. So I think on the AI Act, there will be an AI summit next week in Paris. Maybe you will be there. I'm going to be there. And actually, the idea was, and we had an AI roundtable with Macron here, with top CEOs at the Berlin Global Dialogue. An idea is to have a grand bargain between some of the key players, the companies, to commit of investing in the ecosystem. It's a bit like what you said, working together between business and politics, but in a smart way, not in a dirigist way. You know, we don't need grand strategies for that and that technologies. We just need good conditions for people to do their work. And in Paris, the idea is to change the narrative. I mean, let's see whether von der Leyen will be there. I think Olaf Scholz might go there. I read today there'll be heads of states there. I don't know if Prime Minister of Italy will be there. I mean, the current one. And the idea is to change the narrative and to say, hey, Europe, because the Americans are so good at changing the narrative in their favor. And as you're just saying, I think there's changing the narrative that Europe is there and Europe is in AI and Europe has maybe a European way of doing it. So that's number one of the summit. And number two is a grand bargain to have about 20 CEOs of top companies. I think Höttges is also there, if I remember that. And Airbus is there. Guillaume Faury is in the middle of it, by the way. You should know.
I do know. I do know.
That they commit to, you know, major investments in Europe. And the Commission, on the other hand, we were just talking about that, is thinking sort of directives versus regulation, your point. The AI Act is, I think, a directive, if I think, and they'll be implementing things coming from it. And the Commission, Dombrovskis, who's in charge of simplifying, is willing, that's the other side of the bargain, to think about the regulatory environment, which helps facilitating the ecosystem of AI in Europe. And then we're going to have about 6 months at the EU level to rethink what the AI regulation should look like. And I think it should be informed by people like you or Guillaume of what makes sense.
I mean, I find it great that these summits take place, really. And yes, I knew Airbus was contributing and so on. I find the AI Act horrible. And the appendix to the AI Act horrible. It's an 108-page document or something, plus the appendix of the same size. And it is not so horrible for Meta. It's not so horrible for for the large giants. It's not so horrible for Google. But it's very, very difficult for young companies to develop AI, to document, to pursue, to comply with all the regulation. It's very difficult for small companies or mid-sized companies to deploy AI tools, because the regulation doesn't only affect the developers, it also affects those who deploy AI, and therefore you will have plenty of issues, particularly in the area of HR, for instance, or in the medical area, or in the, whatever is called risk area. Read through that EU AI Act, and see what you think. We've started, Jeanette and I, and a couple of others, Cedric O in France and so on, we started an initiative and tried to gather CEOs and entrepreneurs to sign up to sign that this can't go on. And we sent it to Brussels. And yes, it was, I think, discussed, I don't know. But honestly, it's still there. The Lieferketten-Sorgfaltspflichtengesetz in Germany is still there, even though Chancellor Scholz promised to industry it would be gone by the end of last year. I haven't seen that it was gone. And by no means am I arguing for being irresponsive. I'm not arguing for industry to not care. I do believe industry has a big responsibility. But if you read through all these legislations and then you put yourself in the shoes of a CEO or of a business leader, of an entrepreneur, you will shy away from creating or expanding a business in Europe. And therefore, honestly, we have all the levers in our hands, but we keep talking. And honestly, this can't go on. We need to step up and we need to protest against this. We need to be more vocal. These regulations need to be reduced, else businesses will die in Europe. I'm exaggerating and polarizing it intentionally, but there is a point.
Annika.
Maybe I can add, because thank you so much for being so passionate about this. I couldn't agree more. And maybe just to share there a little bit of an insight, because everyone talks so much about investments and equity invested into venture, but the point is, in the end, it's about building companies that are working. And funnily, people forget about operating cash flow, about really operating revenue. Yeah, you could also grow through revenue, theoretically, of course. And the main way for us as a young company to grow through revenue is to sell. And that's very easy. Yeah? And selling is something that became insanely complicated from the day on when the AI Act was released. I think it was August last year. People were scared. We are selling a lot to SMEs, which is the greatest chance that we have: selling, generating revenue, growing, then getting investments. And our sales cycles, and it's not only my own experience, it's also the experience from other companies, have increased substantially by month. Sometimes they even doubled for some companies. And you can directly calculate what this means for growth for startups in Germany and in Europe. And this is only due to the fact that the AI Act takes, and to be honest, I also agree that it's hard for us to do all the documentation work and all of this. But honestly, if you do really good engineering work, we can handle it. Also in our company size, we can do it. We would be, I'm not happy to do it, but we can. But the SME in a tiny city somewhere in Germany cannot handle that, and they won't. So they will. So what we do is that there's someone who wants to do, who wants to apply AI, but who will not do it because being scared of all the consequences by the AI Act. And that's what's happening.
I've seen that also at the infrastructure layer. I've been in talks with a company that wanted to be the European AI compute infrastructure player. They set up shop in Amsterdam, invested about $1 billion, and came out of the gate saying, okay, we're the European AI infrastructure provider. And they looked around and it was crickets. All of their European customers said, oh, European, we'd rather buy from the US hyperscalers. So literally they thought that their USP was going to be we're Europe for the Europeans, our sovereign infrastructure. And now they're really struggling.
Although there is, I don't want to contradict this case, but there is a growing interest, if not demand, in European-based, European-hosted cloud infrastructure and cloud technologies. And yes, it's difficult, but it's possible to grow that business model within Europe. And there are some players like the Schwarz Group or Ionos to be making a little bit advertising for ourselves. But you know, it's possible.
Absolutely. I would break a lance, if you will, for Achim of Ionos, who won't build a data center anymore in Germany right now because the cost of electricity is too high. His next data center will be in Norway. So we have a little industrial policy there to fix.
Just wanted to come back to, so it's interesting what René says, that it needs to go, this regulation. It's not only AI, it's also supply chain law, it's corporate social responsibility reporting, it's a whole bunch of things. But they have all been carefully negotiated in Brussels for months and months, and this is the resulting compromise of all of that process. And now the game is going to be in this new world with maybe this realization that Europe, the Letta report and others, the name of the game now is going to be in the next 6 months, are they going to do marginal changes? Because that's what experienced Brussels bureaucrats will tell you. They say, look, you know how things work here. They won't reopen the AI Act. They'll look a little bit of the implementation. Will they do marginal changes? And the German government, one side of the election is right now also dramatically asking for, it needs to go. But is this realistic? It needs to go. Yeah, I would agree. It needs to go. I mean, I always fought against them also when I was in government. Is it going to be a marginal, or there's going to be a significant change in all of that? And you can be skeptical about this. And I think that's why protests and making your voice heard and having these summits where actually you tell politicians, also from Ursula von der Leyen, and what's the called, Virkkunen, I think is the commissioner in charge.
Virkkunen, yeah.
basically tell them you won't do any business in Europe anymore unless this changes is going to be very important. But it's going to be interesting to see, is it an incremental change or is Europe capable of doing a rather dramatic change?
So apropos of making your voice heard, we do have some time. We'd love to open things up. If any of you have questions, raise your hand. Yeah. No incremental change on the question front. Okay, we have some hands up. You have microphones? Please. Hey, Daria. Hit the microphone and please introduce yourself. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, yes, I'm Daria Brauniger. I'm with Zalando, where I'm in charge of digital policy. Thank you so much for this interesting debate. I think it's very important points that we're discussing, and I'm sure we're going to keep discussing them for at least a few years. I wanted to say a little bit on a topic that hasn't been touched on so much, and also pose that question, and that's on enforcement. So just to pick up one of the examples, the EU AI Act, we supported very much. We thought while it wasn't perfect, it was good to get it, and to get it now rather than have individual national solutions or to be forced in like 5 years to roll back anything we developed in the meantime. So there's also difference in opinions there. But I think where we agree is that there was a lot of digital new legislation in the last EU term. And while we did support some of them, we see now we're just at capacity on implementing them. We have this unofficial number from the European Tech Alliance that 30% of current tech resources are being blocked by implementing new laws, which is just crazy. And we don't have a Zalando number, but ours is similar. At the same time, we see, well, we're all figuring out how to implement everything. There are other actors, especially from China, who compete with us, who don't really bother about applying any law, not even the existing one and not so much the new one. So for us, there's a real disadvantage on enforcement. We see that authorities don't know how to enforce against actors from abroad, and they just choose us and other European or German companies because it's easier to enforce. And this is becoming a real problem. So my question would be, what can we do better on enforcement? How can we do it better on the national level, but even more so on the EU level? Are there new instruments we can come up with on how to enforce better and how to coordinate enforcement better? And yeah, so we've been thinking about this a bit, but we haven't found a very good solution yet. So maybe there's some new ideas today.
Anyone? René?
One comment. I heard you say you've been supportive of this EU AI Act because it could have been worse. And then you said in the next comment that you're at capacity in implementing from CRITIS to GDPR to God knows what else. That is also a statement. And I think this should be heard by all of us, but also in the political area and the regulatory area. I think in general, one remark, if AI is going to be the geopolitical strategic factor number one, I think. And it is wrong that Europe puts handcuffs on its own hands, but China doesn't have those handcuffs. And we need to think geopolitically here as well. Others are not working in the same ethical framework, what we apply to ourselves. And this is going to be a security and safety aspect for us as well, which we haven't touched upon today. We're still doing as if the world hasn't changed in military side. And I think AI is a very important element of future defense. And therefore, handcuffing ourselves, or let's say limiting ourselves, also in terms of dual use and collaboration in the science sector between business and universities and defense sector is wrong. So I think we should also consider that element. Therefore, I felt like the AI Act should have been much slimmer, more based on principles, and should have been delegated, like in the Bundesnetzagentur, to a sector-specific institution of experts who would dynamically adjust the AI regulation in line with its technological development, as opposed to putting ex ante everything into a hard-coded law, which is so damn difficult to change and adjust over time. That would be a kind of a comment a little bit to yours.
Yeah, the tech usually outruns the legislation in terms of the innovation. And you have, of course, given a lot of thought to what might need to be done to sharpen or improve the competition policy, or at least the way it's being enforced. Any thoughts on that as well?
I mean, this is on the enforcement. You know, I'm not sure this is our problem, a lack of enforcement, but we should, of course, I understand we should enforce the law. I think on competition policy, I would agree with René, and competition policy is it's been attacked all the time as a problem for growth of companies in Europe. I have a slightly different view on that, as René knows. But they're reforming it. I think it's also part of the pressure which has been mounting up, and the new commissioner, Ribera, who's actually comes from the environmental sphere, she's going to look at the dynamics of market and competition and market definition. And so that competition policy is there really to protect small companies, competition. I am a big believer in competition, and not promote big companies per se, unless they deserve it to grow. I think this balance, getting this right, they're going to keep looking at that. So I think this is a very important one. And on China, of course, we need to make sure that others follow our rules, but we need to also think about what others are doing when we set our rules. That was your point just now. And I think on China, if I may, I have a different view than most. I think we should work with China. And I think China is going to be there. It's a major technological innovator at this point. And I think Europe should have its own policy on China, defending their own interests, not being naive. And I know Merkel is being accused of being naive on China, and maybe we were. But this is not the point. I think looking forward, having our own interests, I think it's very important in this new geopolitical world, which is multipolar. And the question is, who are our friends? And America, of course, is our biggest friend. And we're depending on America. Yeah, it is. And we're depending, especially in defense, as you know very well, completely, and security issues on the United States, and even economically.
Which I don't like.
Which you don't like. And I think we should have European sovereignty. We should do much more on that. I think there's, again, agreement on that, but we must have to do it. And it also has to do with money, by the way, on how to spend money on defense issues. But back to my point, I think on China, we should be pragmatic and open and work with them, rather than, decoupling and joining the United States on trying to limit them.
That's great. I think, Daria, I mean, you can tell in Brussels that there's a lot of questions about Ribera, and is she going to enforce anything? And we were talking about it at lunch today. Get used to the phrase little tech, which is caught on also in Silicon Valley from Mark Andreessen and others. I think we might be surprised to find the Trump administration quite hostile to big tech, just as Lina Khan was. And it could get really interesting to find Washington continuing its crusade against big tech on behalf of competition, on behalf of little tech. So we have any other questions? I saw another hand up. Yes, please. Tell us who you are.
Hi, I'm Ellen. I just moved to the EU from Australia about 3 months ago, and I'm studying my MBA here at ESMT. So thank you for sharing all your insights. I found it really interesting to see the differences and similarities of the challenges we face in countries outside of the US and China. And something that I would like to hear your opinions on is where we see the role of corporates helping things like startups and scale-ups to combat the bureaucracy around regulations. I think that we're talking about the metas of the world don't find those regulations a problem. So I want to hear some of your opinions on how the existing infrastructure and corporates can help that.
Anyone with some thoughts? Yeah.
Corporations systematically overcome the arrogance. It's a mentality topic as well. Large corporations often believe they can do everything themselves. And boardroom discussions are sometimes amazingly superficial in this regard. Oh, why can't we do this? But because they're experts, specific, small companies who can provide a solution much quicker, better, faster. And so therefore, collaboration is the name of the game. Be ready to systematically collaborate. At Telecom, we've established a team within the organization to be the mentors of these young companies, and took them by the hand through the bureaucratic jungle, enabled them to collaborate with us faster, easier, and more beneficially, with the likes of Spotify at the time or other European or American young startups. So it's a matter of collaboration and a different mindset, particularly now in aerospace or in defense tech and so on. This is happening. So I could give you a lot of examples for that.
Annika, You're selling to corporate Germany.
Yes, yeah, and that's actually a point. I mean, the hugest asset a corporate can bring to the startup is really working together and becoming a client. But maybe I can extend this question a little bit, not only to corporates, but I think this also holds for the government itself, because I think we underestimate a little bit how much impact government had. Let's take the example of the US on the growth of companies in the AI space that grew through getting customers as getting the government as a customer. That's something that is only very rarely happening here. And now, considering all the situation with the AI Act, how much trust does a startup like ours get through having government as a client? This is of course the very same when it gets to corporates, but it also holds, I think, for the government.
If I can tell an anecdote, I've often founded companies or co-founded or worked on ideas with friends in Silicon Valley. And one thing I wish I could, my wish for Europe about the cultural shift is that you'd be amazed how many young projects are essentially just a pitch deck and a cold email to a chief marketing officer of a Fortune 500 US company that gets a reply. And that's essentially a marketing experiment. And then you can iterate and see, do I have traction here? And I dare say, if you ran that experiment in Europe, good luck. And also, Enrico Letta, I've heard you say, huh?
If you send it to Deutsche Telekom, you'll get an answer.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, there are exceptions.
Send it to Airbus, you get an answer.
There are exceptions that prove the rule. Everyone now has an innovation office that you can go to, and in 18 months, your project will get executed. You've talked a lot about we need to stop saying cross-border. Maybe this would be something also for the single market to happen, that a Finnish startup could send that cold call to, Telefonica down in Spain and get a reply and have them not say, ooh, a Finnish company, why should I even talk to them? So we still have the borders in the head at the level of corporates interacting with startups, don't we? There's nothing. Is there anything we can do there? You can't mandate a mental change. How do we shift that culture?
Yeah, but in reality, we are still there in the problem of stereotypes, of general stereotypes that are the borders that are in our heads. When all the discussion in the media, in the public sphere, in the political sphere is about cross-border mergers in a space where there are no borders. So Commerzbank Unicredit is a potential merger between two European banks. And in Italy, I have to assure you that the big debate is if Unicredit can be considered an Italian bank or not, because there's part of the sovereignist world thinking that Unicredit is a globalist bank, nothing to do with our ground. And here, the big topic is not, is it good for the market or not? The big, allow me to be very frank, the big topic is, how is it possible that a German bank can be, I would say, under the control of an Italian bank? Is, I would say, ontologically not possible. But this is the main problem in Europe. Of course, that's good, but the opposite not good. So I think, I think the big problem is there, and if we have to get out from this mentality. But I want to say one word that will put me in a very masochistic, uncomfortable position, because I have to defend Brussels. Sorry, but I have to defend Brussels. On the regulation on IE, on AI, why Brussels wanted to have a regulation? For one very simple reason, because AI is à la mode, is very à la mode since in the last years. All the member states and all the national parliaments started discussing about a national or a regional law on AI. So the reasons why, the main reasons why Brussels wanted and succeeded in having a regulation, not a directive, a regulation, was because it was, I would say, better than having 27 different national regulations with a total mess. So I insist on the fact that the main problem in Europe, if we have to name it problem, is not Brussels, the European level. is the fact that we have, I would say, a code sharing national and European. We want to keep the national level. Here, the debate in Germany is about national elections, and it is absolutely more important than what we had last year for the European elections. People feel that now they decide, not last year, because the national elections is the core of the sovereignty. But we have at the same time the national and European, and we have to keep together the two. And the outcome of everything is complicated. This is why sometimes the decisions in Brussels to have a EU regulation can be also a solution. Today, we would be in a totally different mess. It is a mess, but it would be worse.
That's comforting words, I suppose. We have less of a mess than we might have had. It's true. I saw it in the crypto world where Brussels rushed to do the Markets in Crypto Act. And I asked, why are you doing this? Shouldn't you just not regulate? And they said, well, if we don't do it, 27 member states, and we got balkanized. So we hear this in Brussels also a lot in almost every sector. We have time, I think, maybe for one more question, if anybody. Go ahead. Yes, please tell us who you are.
Hi, thank you for, does it? Okay. Thank you for today. I'm Edon. I'm also a classmate of Alan. I just started my MBA here at ESMT. You talked about the investment union and savings union. Do you believe that we as Europeans are a bit too risk averse and maybe too complacent? We see in the US, for example, they have such a broad and deep and financial market. It's ingrained in your culture, I would say. And we see that their economy just doesn't know how to stop. Like you go from 0 to 5% and the economy just doesn't stop. And that is an advantage to the population, to technology, to innovation. But here in Europe, I feel like it's not part of our culture. I think, if I'm not mistaken, you can correct me, I think only Germany has like 3 trillion of euros in saving deposits. So are we maybe losing a lot of potential there, or how can we tackle this issue as Europe? Because if I could use one analogy, I don't want to use the war analogy, but it's that expression like you win a battle in a battlefield, but you win the war at home. So it's mostly about mobilizing the people. So how can we address that? Thank you.
Before someone answers, I will say structure leads to culture. In the US, every worker can deduct a very large portion of their paycheck tax-free every month to go into their individual retirement account. That money flows every month unquestioned to Wall Street, and that money flows all the time unquestioned to Silicon Valley, about 46 billion every year into Silicon Valley. We did the math once. The pension fund contribution in the US is less than 1% of the pension fund assets. It's powering all of Silicon Valley. If Europe mobilized the same amount of money in its mattresses, we could match it. But I would love to hear your thoughts also on this.
Just to say, I think you're right. I completely share your point. Two main reasons. One, as you said, is a cultural reason, and it was there before also, before the crisis. But I have to say the situation after the financial crisis is worse for a very simple reason. Because the US took the financial crisis, taking some lessons and restarting after the crisis. We weren't able to do so because during the crisis, we had a mess and the entire European framework was at risk. We were close to death. And when we decided to do something, we adjusted, but we didn't complete the adjustment because the crisis was over. And so we were with half adjustment. And today we are all the feeling that the European Union, I would say, doesn't have the toolbox, the complete toolbox to act in case of a new crisis. This is my feeling. So the general knowledge, the general attitude of all the European leaders, political leaders, business leaders, is to say, we don't know if we are able to overcome a crisis because we don't have the tools. So maybe it's better not to go too close to a new crisis. This is why the attitude to the risk is also, I would say, is worsening after the crisis. Because the idea is to say, for the political leadership, is to say, we don't know who has to be, which adults they have to be in the room where we have to decide Sunday at 7 o'clock before the reopening of the markets. And in my view, this is a crucial topic on this complicated governance we have.
So just on that issue, I think the resilience of Europe to the next crisis is, of course, a huge issue. Also has to do with debt. And then we're back to the Schuldenbremse, actually being ready for the next crisis, having enough firepower. But on your point about I think the capital markets or lack of in Europe is a major disadvantage for the European economy. And we know that 68% more savings in Europe than in the United States. So we've got the capital, and Germans are, Weltmeister in saving, The question is, why is it not invested in Europe? And this has many, many reasons. Some of them are in your report, But then there is also the regulation and the fragmentation of the financial markets, which is what the Savings and Investment Union, which the Commission is now tackling, which we've been working on for 10 years, we haven't been able. And it's not that we're stupid. We don't have a pension system. We have a pay-as-you-go. My daughter lives in California for the last 20 years, so she's been getting rich on her individual retirement account, much richer than me even, and she's, of course, my daughter. She's much younger because of that. So there's some structural problems. But let me give you an example why it's been different. One of the issues is insolvency law. That's one of them. There's supervision, there are securitizations of markets, there are cross-border mergers. But just take a stupid thing like insolvency law. Now talk to a German insolvency specialist. It's heavy, okay? And one reason why we can't get a stupid European insolvency law going is that in Germany, for historical reasons, insolvency balances the rights of the debtor and the creditor. So, and in Germany, we put a lot of emphasis on saving the creditor. So, he should get his money back if the guy loses the money. And that goes through all the German law. And in Southern Europe, it's a little bit the other way around. So you actually need, as a German, to change the philosophy of insolvency law, to agree to it. You can go through all European regulations like that. At the end, it comes to different histories and different cultures and different ways we've been doing it in Germany. But we need to get over that. And the German Justice Ministry, just Mr. Cookies, who's now the finance minister, who was in the same job I had for 10 years, now he's finance minister. He said that the Justice Ministry has just given up its opposition on insolvency law, this German emphasis on the debtor, and that will help us move forward. So, so we need to get all of that going, and I think that will help us attract more investment. I think this is the key question: is how do we get more investment into Europe?
Super, René.
If I could only add a sentence, even in the rare case when people in Europe decide to invest, most of that capital still goes to the US. So
yeah. I mean, that's the problem.
There's also an unnecessary restriction, in my view, tight restriction on insurance companies, pension funds, etc., that their ability to allocate more money of their hundreds of billions of dollars into illiquid asset classes, i.e. into VC or into private equity, is unnecessarily restricted to a tiny bit of their total capital to be invested. And I think that's one of the big injustices anyway, that we can't democratize the private equity or venture capital system much smarter and make it part of long-term, for the pension age, make it part of the long-term savings and return potential for the normal individuals. So I think that could be a means to get there.
Yeah, and maybe also a little piece of hope. The birth of the US venture capital industry started 1979, 1980 roundabout. Check the law that we changed about how we enforced the prudent man rule in a court about how a fund manager could allocate their resources. So that's the big bang in US when we changed the liability for someone managing that money, that they could put more risk in their portfolio, and boom, off we went. It's not like we had a giant venture capital industry in the 50s. So the US is only about 20 years ahead. This has been really great. We've run out of time for questions, but I'd love to give everybody maybe one last crack. Also, angesichts der Tatsache we have the future in the room. We have a lot of really great students here who are thinking about their education, but also the future, also people that have even potentially bet their future on being in Europe. Let's maybe end with a bit of a note of optimism about, we've talked all day about what's wrong with Europe and what's wrong with the business model and what we need to fix. But if we could end with a bit of optimism about what's right with Europe or what has you hopeful. I'm an eternal optimist anyway. I would love to hear some of your causes for optimism, also for the next generation here that's hopefully going to be founding businesses or deploying capital.
When Jacques Delors was asked to say optimism or pessimism, his answer was always activistic. No pessimistic, no optimistic. We have to act. And this is what we have to do today. We need to do so. I see a big change, I have to say. In the last months, these topics are the center of the stage. They weren't there in the last years. And the complexity of our system means that if these topics are not the center of the stage, it will be impossible so to have action. So now there's the precondition is there to have action, so please act.
René, you have to convince your investors to invest in Europe all the time. What has you optimistic about, about the case?
We have a lot of well-qualified tech people, for instance. We do have a good industrial basis. I think we can do even better with the people we have. And I think we have to unleash these, these energies. I think it's great to have these wake-up calls. And Europe is being woken up at the moment, or is waking up at the moment because of these wake-up calls. So I'm, generally speaking, mid to long-term optimistic.
Annika, you founded a company here, you crazy person.
Yes.
You're obviously, you're long on Europe. Why?
I'm optimistic anyway. Maybe I can add some other point, because I would like everyone to make the right decision in the upcoming elections. And I think more than that, I think we all have, like from a founder's perspective, but also from a corporate perspective, I think we have all the responsibility to become more political active. I think that's something we haven't really touched in the discussion, but I think innovation must be understood by politicians as a holistic thing, yeah, from research transfer, then funding over the implementation of the AI Act, then capital markets and all of that. And I think it's so hardly important that politics are fully understanding, or politicians are fully understanding innovation as a whole. And I think all of us with our expertise can apparently help with contributing to the expertise that the politicians really need. And I think they are actually apparently also asking for that. So I really wish that all of us are a little bit more excited about politics and contribute.
The host of the Berlin Global Dialogue is always having to say, I invite you to the Museum of Industry, or you also are, I think, out there every day trying to say why Europe has a chance and why Germany still has a chance. What are some causes for optimism for you?
Yeah, just wondering, what is the right decision in the elections?
I thought that too. Let's not put her on the spot, right?
I think we will leave that up to the debate afterwards. But I think, I think one point is the narrative. I mean, let's talk Europe up and not only down. And I think young people like yourselves who are here studying in Europe from all over the world, Australia and other places, are sort of ambassadors of that. I think I rather live in Europe than anywhere else. Half of my family lives in beautiful places in the US. For other reasons, personal reasons, family reasons, but I think Europe is a great continent. At the same time, we need to move and we need action. So there's this balance of keep warning and saying bad things, but still being positive about it. And I think, you as young people, I think you can be on the positive side. I think innovation is the answer, finance is the answer. And I think that's also the answer to the global issue. So even if you're not just looking at Europe, but SDGs and climate and social responsibility, I mean, it goes beyond just competitiveness of Europe. Europe has a great social model. I really think if you look at the US, I'd rather be here just for that reason, by the way. So I think, having a positive narrative, doing a bit of a Trump maybe is too much, I think, but I think we should talk it up. But at the same time, we need to do it. And I'm positive we can do it because I think, the people have understood that we need to do something. And you could be ambassadors there and speak up. protest or activists. I think that's very important. As young people, that's what you should be doing. And thank you for coming to the ESMT.
Oh, super. Yeah, I was just going to return the favor and thank you, our hosts, ESMT, for your amazing hospitality. The Delors Centre, also Johannes and Enrico Letta, we're so grateful to have partnered with you on this, and also René, Annika, and Dr. Röller. Thanks for being such great speakers. Please, a hand for them.